Today we talk about pop art. We're coming to the end of our series, 2 more talks next week. So we've been moving, as you know, progressively up through the East Building, and now we're up to the area of art, for the most part, in the late 50s and 60s, pop art. And for the most part, we're going to be talking about, at least what we have in our collection, is American pop art. But of course, that's not where pop art started. Pop art is not an American invention, shall we say. It's British. And this is where it begins. So in 1952, there's a group of young English painters and sculptors and architects and critics. All of those areas are represented. And they all gathered at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London, and they called themselves the Independent Group. And they were brought together essentially by common interests that they had, and most of those common interests revolved around contemporary popular culture. So they were fascinated with cinema, science fiction, anything to do with machines, technology, television, the automobile, all kinds of domestic appliances, gadgets. This is the stuff they loved, and it brought them all together from their respective fields. So note, we had painters, sculptors, architects, and critics. We had it all kind of covered. And they were particularly interested in all of these things. They may have been British, but they were particularly interested in all of these things as they were being now utilized and celebrated in the United States. So they were British, but they actually thought this stuff was more interesting the way it was unfolding in America. So they came together in 1952 at the ICA, and then 4 years later, in 56, they organized a major exhibition, the same group of people, at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, and it was titled "This Is Tomorrow." So there's the poster on the left, and there's a catalog on the right from 1956. This was organized into 12 sections, and each section of the exhibition was a self-contained environment. And each section was put together by a team that included a painter, a sculptor, and an architect. So it had these large sort of constructions and installations you could walk in and things like that. I'm not going to get involved in all that because it will take too much time. But what's most important, or who was most important at this exhibition, and for British pop in general, are 2 individuals. The critic Lawrencelloway. So now, we got another critic. He's kind of the comparable to Rosenberg, Greenberg, all the guys in America. This is Lawrencelloway here on the left. And then the most talented and one of the most important British artists of the 20th century is the man you see on the right, and that is Richard Hamilton in a photograph from 1963. Hamilton was in group 3 in terms of the 12 groups, and he had his colleagues, and he was asked. They put together an installation that reflected a lot of interest in American cinema, movies, Hollywood, things like that. But they felt that they needed each section felt they needed their own poster, even though there was one poster I just showed you for the whole show. But each group wanted their own individual poster. So Hamilton was asked to create the poster for his group, and it's, of course, one of the most famous images in the 20th century. This is the poster that Hamilton created, and the title of this poster is "Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different?" So I haven't finished. Let me start again. Just what is it that makes today's home so different, so appealing? That's the title, from 1956. So he makes this poster, and it's a collage, obviously, and he and his wife had gone through thousands of magazines looking for just the right sorts of images, and essentially what the poster does visually is to answer the question. So just what is it that makes today's home so different, so appealing? Well, here's the answer. Everything that's in this image. And in fact, you see here for the first time in a work of art, the word pop here. And in fact, Lawrencelloway is the first critic to ever use that term pop in print in 1958, or to come, not just the word, but the term pop art. He coins that in 1958. So all this is happening in England and in London. So what is Hamilton's collage and why is it so important? Well, it was essentially a pictorial list of the things that answered the question that's asked in the title, and even the title itself was actually taken from an actual advertisement. So he didn't make up the title. It actually came from an actual advertisement that he just used. And here's what we have. The collage, the answer to the question is both tabular and pictorial. And so it's a set of prescribed interests that most of the groups had. And so here is the list on the left that Hamilton came up with: woman, humanity, history, man, food, newspaper, cinema, TV, telephone, comics, which is picture information, words, which is textual information, tape recording, which is oral information, cars, domestic appliances, and space. By space, they mean outer space. So that was the, almost all of those things, more or less, deal with communication, of course, to a large extent, with words, printing, film, TV, telephone, tape recording. The thing to keep in mind about this is that this is not a data attack on these things. They love this stuff. So they're not trying to ridicule it. They're accepting it, and they're, in fact, celebrating it. So, and what they're doing to come up with this list is to just sort of look around the world that they're in and to define these things that they feel are now defining their time. So again, in terms of art, this is sort of like surrealism, futurism. There's no such thing as pop art yet. It's these artists who are just beginning to define this kind of terminology. Alloway later would use the term pop art to refer to a movement, but I'm not even sure you could call it so much a movement at this point. Then on the right is another list. Hamilton wrote then a letter to his colleague, the architect Peter Smithson, in 1957, and then he outlined further what he thought pop art should be, using the term pop art to refer to art that's manufactured for a mass audience. And so then you see here that it should be popular, designed for a mass audience, transient, short-term solution, expendable, easily forgotten, low cost, in other words, no museums, low cost, mass-produced. It should be young. By that they meant it should be aimed at a youthful audience. Witty, sexy, gimmicky, glamorous, big business. So you put these two lists together, and you have pretty much everything that will encompass both British and American pop art as it begins to develop and unfold both in Great Britain and also in the United States. Now let's look a little more closely at the collage and start to show you some of the sources. So here's the collage, and this is the first source. This is from Ladies' Home Journal, June 1955, and it's an ad for Armstrong Floors. And the title of the ad, which I don't think I have in there, it was on a separate page, The Modern Fashion in Floors. So this became the space. See? This inspired the space here. You'll notice here there's a vacuum that's going up and a woman's vacuuming. Okay, well, that's a Hoover vacuum. And this is the ad he saw. So there's the vacuum. And there's the staircase, right? So he cut all that out. This is from Ladies' Home Journal. It's the new Hoover Constellation vacuum. Then we've got this bodybuilder. This is not Charles Atlas, but he's sort of the British equivalent. This guy's name is Erwin Szabo Kazuski. Erwin Szabo Kazuski. He was a bodybuilder. He was a champion bodybuilder. This is not this, but this is the guy. This was from a different ad. So, but this is the man. Here's his name right there. And he was always on the cover of this magazine called Strength and Health. This is from 1954. here. Then you'll notice here there's this woman reclining with the lampshade on her head. And that was actually cut out from an ad that incorporated the American model, Jo Baer. This is Jo Baer here in 2005. She was an American painter. She was a hard edge painter, part of came out of New York. But she was also, to make money, she was also a fashion model and modeled for a lot of ads. And so this was from an ad that she didn't have that on her head in the original ad. So that's her there in 2005. I think she's still alive, but I'd have to check that again. So here's, now notice, you have to keep in mind that tabular thing, comics, TV, radio, because all these things are being addressed here in each of these objects. So you'll notice on the wall there's a poster of a romance comic. Well, here is the comic that inspired it, a True Romance or Young Romance. This is 1959. Of course, there's a television. And then in the television is a woman on the telephone. So you've got television in the same thing. And this is a Stromberg Carlson ad for television over here from 55, 56. So you go through this collage, maybe I should go back for a second, and you see all of the things that were mentioned: tape recording, newspapers, cinema, picture information, automobiles, that's the Ford thing. This is a photograph. This looks like the carpet here, but what that actually is an aerial photograph of a beach filled with people. This is a picture of the Earth. That becomes outer space, that becomes the ceiling here. Old Master, so we have pictorial information here. All of the different things I just mentioned back here. You had the woman, of course, on the thing. Humanity was the beach scene. History was this history painting. Man, food. Food, of course, was the proverbial canned ham here. Newspapers, cinema, TV, telephone, I showed you that. Comics, I showed you that. Words are everywhere. Tape recording, cars, domestic appliances, we have the vacuum, and then outer space as well. Now, so this is put together by a British artist, by Richard Hamilton, for their exhibition at Whitechapel. But of course, what these British artists were so intrigued with was all of this stuff that was happening in the United States. So let's just sort of bring that up to. So I've just gone through and picked out some wonderful 40s and 50s nostalgic illustrations that essentially dealt with what was being promoted in the 40s, but especially in the 50s, as the American dream, right? Look, that's what I'm going to have. So she wants a new kitchen. Let's just sit a while on our terrace. We've been doing gardening, and we'll have a little something beer belongs, enjoy it. Of course, let's all gather around in the evening for a television show here. Now, in 1947, looking at this ad here, General Mills introduces the first boxed cake mix. It's for a ginger cake. So now we don't have to slave over the kitchen. We can have an instant cake mix, turn out a cake, and go out and have fun. So in 1947, General Mills introduces the first boxed cake mix. 1948, Gerber Baby Foods introduces the idea of baby food in jars that can be given to your child. And in 1946, the American birth rate jumps 20% over the previous year. So you started to see the so-called baby boom right after the war. Of course, no American dream would be complete without a car. So these are Chrysler ads from 56 and 57. Power steering first appears in the Chrysler, in case you're interested, in the Chrysler Crown Imperial in 1951. My favorites, though, are the kitchen ones. Here on the left is the 1956 ad for a Crosley refrigerator freezer. if you want to talk about the 50s now as an age of abundance, we've got through the war, and now we're, look at the food here. I mean, you could like feed an army here. And not only that, but now I need a freezer as well, in addition to the refrigerator. So the ultimate in food refrigerators here was the Chrysler Shelvador twins, this was called. The Chrysler Shelvador twins. They were side-by-side units, and they would hold up to 14 cubic feet of food, and the all-freezer unit could hold up to 470 pounds of frozen food. Of course, television ads on the right, RCA Victor television, super sets ad from 1951. By the end of 52, there are more than 15 million television sets in the United States. And that jumps by 4 million from 2 years earlier. So in 2 years, it increased over 4 million. Here again, look at all my food. And we're not going to talk about Richard Hamilton or some of the others, but of course he really takes off with this idea of the woman as the queen of the kitchen. Sometimes she's actually shown with a crown. And she's displaying her sort of larder here. You have a refrigerator that has a freezer, but then I might need an entirely separate freezer. Here, TV dinners are invented. We got television, we're gonna stay home. Who wants to cook? Not me. Let's throw in a ginger cake, but we need an entree. So the turkey, these are of course created by Swanson Foods, you see here, in 53, 54. The first TV dinner is the turkey TV dinner, and that debuts in 1952. Then that's followed, that was such a hit, they come out with chicken in 1953 and beef in 1954. I'm late, but dinner won't be. You're ready for him. Yeah. You gotta love this stuff. How about instant orange juice? That comes out in 1955. Minute Maid, this is an ad for Minute Maid orange juice on the left. The Minute Maid modern orange juice business starts in 1946. The first shipments of Minute Maid orange juice that are shipped are the orange juice made from concentrate is what I'm talking about, concentrate. And then, of course, we got to wash our clothes, and sometimes it's nice to have a pink washer. This is a Whirlpool ad from 1956 for a top-loading washing machine. This is the first top-loading washing machine comes out in 1947. You noticed in the Richard Hamilton collage, looking through the window, you could see the cinema, and you could see the marquee, and with the film that it was showing in the collage was Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. So we have talkies, movies that come out, the Jazz Singer came out on October 6, 1927. But you also saw, if you look closely in that image, this term cinerama. Because now what you had, because movies were losing hordes of people to television, nobody was going to the movies anymore because they could sit home and watch television, have a TV dinner, have a ginger cake, wash it down with some beer and orange juice, and then they were ready. And then I'm ready for you, you're ready for me, and let's go. So to get people away from the television set, you had to have some bigger effects in film. So that introduced these widescreen effects now. Cinerama, VistaVision, CinemaScope. You start getting these movies where the screen is gigantic, and certainly that cannot be duplicated on a television screen. Today we've come so far, now we're watching on a screen that's smaller than a sheet of notebook paper. Let's not get me started on that. The only thing worse than that is talking about colorized films, and I'm not going to do that. So this is the climate, the 50s. You all know it. Most of us have lived through it. And this is the backdrop that's affecting the artists, and these young artists, very young, in both England and the United States. So Now we can begin to look a little more closely at how this is reflected in our permanent collection. And so here's a wall plaque, and I'm showing you Roy Lichtenstein's Look Mickey from 1961, one of our most important paintings, not just pop art paintings, but one of our most important paintings in the National Gallery, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I'm just introducing it to you now. Certainly this is the influence of comic books and illustration. All of these artists were interested in things like that, and that was already alluded to in the Hamilton collage. This is, again, this room has already changed, so not everything, the way you see it here, is the way it is now. But this is Claes Oldenburg's Clarinet Bridge, Wayne Thiebaud's Cakes. This is the Lichtenstein I just showed you. This is James Rosenquist. This wall is devoted, but again, I think that wall has now changed to Jasper Johns, who, by the way, is not a pop artist, nor is Robert Rauschenberg. So please, for my sake, don't really, they're important to pop art, but they're not pop artists. Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg are Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg. They're separate. So here is Raymond Saunders' Red Star. That came to us through the Corcoran. So did the Warhol, Mao, Boy for Meg, Marilyn Monroe. And then Now Let Us Praise Famous Men, the Warhol, that's based on the family portrait of Robert Rauschenberg. Again, Boy for Meg, Robert Indiana, Jesus Saves. So these works are up and down, and others are replacing them, again, because even with the new gallery space, we don't have room for everything that we would like to put up. Now, I want to come back and kind of review or repeat quickly some of the things we were talking about last time, because we're going to have to spend a little more time talking about critics and criticism. You'll recall that I mentioned last time that after abstract expressionism had been on the scene for a decade or so, everybody's starting to think, well, okay, I think that's run its course. You know, as I said last time, you can't be avant-garde forever. So there were all these points of view being put forward as to what should be the successor to abstract expressionism. And I mentioned some of these here because most of this played out through the writings of critics and through curatorial decisions made at major museums, and most especially the museum that was most important for this was MoMA in New York. So I mentioned New Images of Man. This was Peter Seltz's show at MoMA where he was advocating for a return to figuration. William Seitz was a curator at MoMA. He did a show called Assemblage, The Art of Assemblage. He was advocating for that. Seitz also then did a show on op art called The Responsive Eye. These were all 59, 61, and 65, so it's right in this period. Everybody's debating. It's a very, very fertile and very exciting, in many ways, time to be discussing these things. It's not something we do much anymore. Each of these movements had a champion. So Thomas Hess, remember, was writing for Art News, and Hess was actually saying, no, abstract expressionism is not dead. It's being now given over and taken over by a very talented group of second-generation abstract expressionists, and the one that he favored the most was Joan Mitchell. He said, no, there's still a lot of great original, younger abstract expressionists, so he was of that ilk. Hilton Kramer was writing for Arts Magazine at the time, and I'll come back to him in a second. Kramer hated everything, so all of this stuff was junk here. We talked about Clement Greenberg. Of course, he had chosen the DC artist, so that's his thing. Harold Rosenberg had said, no, I remember abstract expressionism isn't about purity, it's about the actual act of painting, the arena, the action, and that, so he was championing things that now return to a kind of visceral, real action happenings. And eventually, in fact, it's Rosenberg's track that will lead us to pop art. Somebody we didn't mention last time, and now we are going to mention him because he's important, is Leo Steinberg. So I know we got Clement Greenberg, Harold Rosenberg, and Leo Steinberg. And Leo Steinberg is very important. He's not a trained, I don't mean to say he's not trained, but he is less a critic and more an art historian. And he's different because he is trained as an art historian. He's different than Clement Greenberg, and he's different than Harold Rosenberg. And he is going to pretty much say, no, abstract expressionism is dead. But where art is going now is towards two guys, Rauschenberg and Johns. That's where the sort of future lies. So we have that. Let me just go back to Hilton Kramer, because it's a name you probably know. He was the most conservative of all these critics. And as I said, pretty much he hated just about everything. So he hated action painting. He didn't like the New York School. He hated pop art, conceptual art. He hated all postmodern art. He is essentially the defender of high culture. So art should stay in its traditions or reflect art history. It should be about craft and technique and, the art of the museums, essentially. It should be something tried and tested. He wrote for Arts Magazine. Then he was the critic for The Nation. Then he was the chief art critic for the New York Times for a number of years. And at the Times especially, he was because that's a pretty big platform, he was very much against what he would sometimes refer to as artistic nihilism. All these people putting junk together and going out and having happenings, and this is, oh my God, I'm going to die. And that actually got him into trouble at times with the Times, so he resigned from the Times in 1982. But then he co-founded with Seymour Lipman a very conservative journal that's still around, The New Criterion. So today that's the most conservative art journal that you can read. So here's Joan Mitchell. We saw her before. This is in her Paris studio in '56. This is Clement Greenberg talking to Thomas Hess. So Hess was at the Met, and Hess was advocating, contrary to Greenberg, of course, that no, we don't have to go to Washington. There's a great second generation of abstract expressionists who are worthy of our attention, most especially Joan Mitchell was the artist that he championed. And you'll recall when we saw our painting, the title of this painting was Salute Tom. It was a tribute to her friend Thomas Hess because he had championed her art. He had died suddenly, I told you, of a heart attack at the Met. He died right at his desk at the age of 57 in '78. So Joan Mitchell did this large painting that we own as a tribute to Thomas Hess. Then we've got the dynamic duo that we've already talked about and their particular points of view. Greenberg Purity, only that which refers to the art itself, in the case of painting, flatness and color. And of course, Rosenberg talking about the act of painting, the process, the arena. So let's follow, we know where the Greenberg goes, because that's DC, we talked about that. But where really does the Rosenberg train take us? Well, one of the places it takes us is to happenings. So let's just briefly, if I may, talk a little bit about happenings, because they were a big part of this in the 50s and early 60s. Happenings tend to emerge in the 50s. They're this kind of raucous, frivolous, crazy, provocative, nutty kinds of series of uncensored events. You would be invited to a gallery, and an artist would have orchestrated and choreographed and put on a kind of a happening. He would have asked other artists to participate. It could be a scripted thing. We have the script sometimes. So it's like it's a performance. And it's usually not a particularly well-crafted thing. It's very kind of spontaneous and sort of the seat of your pants type of thing. Happenings, though, are part of a worldwide phenomena. They were especially popular also in Paris and other places throughout Europe after the war, because we had come through this horrific war, and humanity had emerged from all of this deprivation and scarcity of materials, and now all of a sudden it's the 50s, and we've got TV dinners and television sets and all of this stuff. So there was an abundance. There's this kind of a self-confidence about things maybe now in the 50s. And so it's seen as a kind of celebration in some ways. Let's break out now. We suffered through all of this hardship. Let's now just get crazy, essentially. And that's essentially what happens. So happenings are born in this period of transition, really, that we're talking about right now, between abstract expressionism and pop art. They fit right in, sort of in that place. In New York, the major artists involved with happenings are Alan Caprow, K-A-P-R-O-W, Jim Dine, the artist, Robert Whitman, Red Grooms, but the most important one is the one you probably know, and that's Claes Oldenburg. So this is a photograph here. It's a cast photo on the left of a work that was a happening that was created by Claes Oldenburg that took place at the Rubin Gallery in New York City on February 21st to the 26th, 1961, and the work is called Circus. Then it's subtitled, because it has two parts, Circus, Part 1, Ironworks, Part 2, Photo Death. Those are the two sections. These are all this is Claes Oldenburg right here. So these are all of his friends, and in fact, there are tons of people here that you know. Tom Wesselman was in this group here, and there are others. So when I started thinking about how could I tell you what this was about, I did try. I sat down and I started, okay, to summarize. And then to a certain point, I just gave up, and I was going to just say, you had to be there. So let me read you a little bit of what I wrote, but then it just makes no sense. So the audience is seated in a conventional theater, and those people who couldn't be seated came and they were standing. There's a deep square stage that was in front of them. There are these 4 light bulbs that are hanging on a sort of just the cords. So the effect is very dingy, kind of a little bit spooky. There will be 34 events in this circus. It's going to be a long night. And they're divided into 7 sets. 4 of the sets deal with this theme of ironworks, and 3 deal with this theme of photo death. The audience, of course, in all the happenings is meant to participate. So once you get carried away enough, you can just start doing whatever the hell you want to do. There is Max Baker was an artist. He was controlling the lights. There's a guy comes in with a bag, and all the actors come in from the back of the stage, and they start doing some really chaotic, cacophonous things. This is where I stopped writing. So this is one group. The other one of the great happenings is this one on the right. This is called American Moon, and it was performed at the Rubin Gallery in New York on November 29th to December 4th, 1960. And it was put together by Robert Whitman, who's the guy in the trapeze here. Again, I gave it a shot. There are 6 big paper tunnels that come outward from a central core, and the audience sits in the tunnels. So you're actually in the tunnels. And there are these curtains with grids of paper that you see here that come down. And then the performers start moving and swinging in their trapezes, and then everything starts moving. And the actors and the people, you're in the tunnel, you want to get out of the tunnel, so you have to go somewhere else, and it's like you might get hit by a guy on a trapeze. It just gets sort of really, there's a giant plastic balloon that's rolled around. All of this has a soundtrack of a vacuum cleaner. This one what was the desire here, as Whitman said, was to sort of try to create a 3-ring circus, just have, all this stuff going on. So those are happenings. It's a rich history, and the history of happenings, of course, takes you well beyond into things like Fluxus and other things that will then become very important in both European art and American art. So this tradition certainly doesn't die here. But now we have to talk about Leo Steinberg. And here he is, a younger photograph on the right. He's very important. He's every bit as important as Greenberg or Rosenberg, but he's trained as an art historian. The others were not. They're sort of pure critics. So Steinberg spent most of his teaching career at the University of Pennsylvania. He was there from basically 1975 onwards, but before that he had taught at Hunter College and CUNY. He had taught at Columbia, at Harvard, the University of Texas at Austin. He was a critic, so he wrote for all the journals, Commentary, The Partisan Review, Art News, Art Forum, October. What would he champion? Well, he would champion the next generation of artists who he felt were leaving behind all of that painterly theatrical stuff of the abstract expressionists, all that ego, angst, existentialist kind of stuff for something that was going to be cooler, more detached, sort of more intellectual, more cerebral. He said at one point in a lecture he gave in St. Louis in 1960, he said, quote, "Abstract expressionism was history, and that the next wave had come in with Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns. What was needed in the mid-60s was resistance to Clement Greenberg." So he's going, these guys are actually, they're going right at each other. So his desire was to steer things away from the formalism of Clement Greenberg, because Greenberg was so into purity that he didn't take into consideration anything else, the biography of the artist, the social context, culture, anything else that produced it. And for an art historian like Steinberg, that seemed kind of silly. So actually Steinberg was born in Moscow. Then his family emigrated to Berlin. They fled the Nazis. He moved to England. He was educated at the Slade School initially. Then he came to New York City after the war, and he got his art history degree at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU. And people forget what he wrote his dissertation on. He didn't write his dissertation on anything modern. He wrote on Francesco Borromini, the Baroque architect who was Bernini's great rival. Steinberg is brilliant, and he shows this kind of ability to go between modern and more historical. His writings should be read, not just the ones on contemporary art. This is a famous Steinberg quote: "If a work of art or a new style disturbs you, then it is probably good work. If you hate it, it's probably great." One of the most important books that everybody reads, it's a collection of his essays that was put together in 1972, is this book called Other Criteria, Confrontations with 20th Century Art. The book got published in 72, but the essays in the book go back to the 60s. And there are particularly important passages and ideas here. I'm showing you a picture of Rauschenberg and Johns at a very young age. This is in 1954. They're in Johns' studio on Pearl Street. So one of the great moments in Other Criteria is when Steinberg says this. I'm quoting now. "Something happened in painting around 1950, most conspicuously, at least within my experience, in the work of Robert Rauschenberg and Dubuffet. We can still hang their pictures, just as we tack up mops and architectural plans or nail a horseshoe to the wall for good luck. Yet these pictures no longer simulate vertical fields, but opaque flatbed horizontals." Notice the term flatbed, right? That comes from a printing press, right? "They no more depend on a head-to-toe correspondence with human posture than a newspaper does. The flatbed picture plane makes its symbolic allusion to hard surfaces such as tabletops, studio floors, charts, bulletin boards, any receptor surface on which objects are scattered, on which data is entered, on which information may be received, printed, impressed, whether coherently or in confusion. The pictures of the last 15 to 20 years insist on a radically new orientation in which the painted surface is no longer the analog of a visual experience of nature, but of operational processes." Now, what he's saying here is that there's a fundamental shift, and it begins with, he thinks, especially Rauschenberg, but also Johns, in shifting the idea of a surface, a canvas, that has always been some kind of illusionistic idea of nature and that has worked as a kind of field, right? To now the idea that a canvas surface is just a support. It's just a thing to hang other things on, right? That's what painting is about. Who does that better than Rauschenberg, right? Just hang stuff on here, right? The other thing he's saying here is about this, no longer this visual experience of nature. He's saying that when these works are created, there's a fundamental shift from nature, from nature to culture. In other words, an artist is no longer looking at nature and saying, I'm going to paint a tree. Robert Rauschenberg, or anybody in this period, is looking at culture and says, I'm going to put up a cereal box. You know, I'm going to put a stuffed eagle. I'm going to put a pillow. I'm going to put stuff, so it's culture. It's not nature anymore. See what I'm saying? Okay, that's pretty important. So in essence, for example, when you look at Rauschenberg and Johns, what does some of this mean? I think there are four things that Steinberg is sort of advancing here, and then Rauschenberg is the guy who runs with this. First is that an artist is not just ego. We're doing away with Jackson Pollock and all these guys who are existentialists, and oh my God, my anxiety and my brushstroke is my tension, and I'm Jungian, I'm Freudian. So that's gone. An artist is not just ego, he's part of a cultural context. And because he's part of a cultural context, we can all bring meaning to the work. You know, I don't know, an oatmeal box might mean something to me, might mean something different to you. Secondly, kind of relates to what I just said, society will play a role in establishing meaning and value. We sort of have a role. For example, Rauschenberg does a series of paintings in dirt, and then he does another series of paintings in gold leaf. Now, who determined in society that gold is precious and dirt is not? Somebody did. Somewhere that got established long before we were around, right? So Rauschenberg did these works, and he predicted that all of the gold leaf paintings would sell and none of the dirt ones would. And he was absolutely right. This third point I've already mentioned, and that is the canvas of a painting is not a surface, like Greenberg kept going on about, but it's a literal support. It's just something to hang other stuff on. So you'll see a Rauschenberg or a Johns painting, there'll be hooks on it. Something will be hanging, hats on there, and arms on there, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And then the other point is now that a canvas is no longer an emotive field like it was for the abstract expressionism, like I was just saying. I'm putting my guts and my ego and my id and everything else here on the surface. It's just a physical fact. It's just a physical fact. It's not some emotive field. It's a thing made up of other things. That's it, okay? So that's what is important now when we start to look at Rauschenberg and Johns and why they are separate. They owe a lot, the pop artists owe a lot to the things they do, but their ideas are different. Now, I want to mention something in this regard about this relationship to the abstract expressionists, and Steinberg saying, okay, that's over. I think Rauschenberg and Johns are the guys. And how Rauschenberg himself, you'll recall, Rauschenberg starts with these guys. He starts as an abstract expressionist. You know, he has a series of early paintings. Remember I told you he's at the Cedar Bar? You know, he's sitting there and these guys are clubbing each other and fighting there. And he's like, oh my God, I got to find a different bar. Because he realized, I don't have anything in common with these guys. They're just way over on a different planet. So this is on the left, a very famous, iconic work. By the way, this is a very good slide. Because the formal title of this work on the left is Erased de Kooning Drawing from 1953. So what Rauschenberg did as he's figuring out who am I, and of course he's figuring this out with Jasper Johns, and they're realizing, you know, I don't think we should go to the Cedar Bar, we might get killed, and we just have to go somewhere else and find our own voice. So Rauschenberg admires the abstract expressionists. It's not that he thinks, you know, he knows, my God, these guys are iconic, and how can I ever get out from their shadow? He greatly admires de Kooning. He thinks de Kooning is like the greatest of the great. And they know each other, they're friends, basically. So one day, Rauschenberg takes a bottle of scotch, and he goes to de Kooning's studio, and he knocks on the door. And as soon as you got a bottle of scotch, you're allowed to come in. So they come in, they start talking, drinking, and then Rauschenberg says, I want to ask you something. And he said, what I'd like to, and now just hear me out before you, he said, I'd like to take one of your drawings and I'd like to erase it. I'm going to take it. First he said, I would like to have one of your drawings. And de Kooning was very flattered. He said, oh, well, yeah, sure, okay. And then Rauschenberg realized he had to tell him the truth. And he said, but wait a minute, I got to tell you, actually. He said, if you give me a drawing, I'm going to erase it. And de Kooning, there's this moment of silence. And de Kooning thinking, I don't know, I kind of like this kid, but he says, well, okay. So de Kooning pulls out some portfolios, he starts flipping through things, and he pulls out like 5 or 6 drawings, and Rauschenberg's looking at them, and then de Kooning says something interesting. He said, no. He said, none of these. And he puts them back. He says, if you're going to do this, he says, then I have to give you a drawing that I would be sad to lose. I have to give you a drawing that means something to me, not something that I don't care about. So he went to a different portfolio of things, and he pulled out a drawing, and he said, here, this is the one I'm going to give you. And this one does mean something to me, because it was related to the Woman series. So Rauschenberg takes it, goes back to his studio, and over about 2 to 3 weeks, using a dozen different kinds of erasers, because it was harder than hell to get this thing erased, he erases it. And he said it was harder than a lot of the work that he had ever done to erase this thing. It had been a sort of a mixed media drawing, and he had to use different erasers. He kept experimenting, and he really did not get it all off. There are some traces still on the drawing. When he finished it, he showed it to Jasper Johns and said, well, I'm done. And then they decided, Jasper Johns actually decided that we should frame it and we should put a tag on it. So this is all done by Jasper Johns, not by a museum. And it's titled down here, Erased de Kooning Drawing, Robert Rauschenberg, 1953. Now, this drawing today is in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and it's out. I would say it's sensitive to light, but there's, but I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure it's so light sensitive. So this is a really provocative conceptual thing here, because you have to wonder: is this an act of homage on the part of Rauschenberg, provocation, humor? Is it destructive? Is it nihilistic? Rauschenberg at one time said it was a celebration. And again, he certainly admired de Kooning. In any case, we were never sure what the drawing was. De Kooning couldn't remember, and this and that. And in 2010, the museum took the drawing out and they subjected it to a digital imaging effort, and using an infrared scan and a whole bunch of science that I really don't understand, to see if they could see what had been there when he had been given the drawing, and this is the result. So this does not exist. This was this, as far as we can tell, and it was part of this woman figure is very important here. The other interesting thing, so this is what we think the drawing was that de Kooning gave Rauschenberg. I was going to say something else. Oh, yeah, the other thing about it that was difficult is that de Kooning himself would often use an eraser when he was working. He would draw and then he would erase. So sometimes you're not sure if the erasure was Rauschenberg's or if it was de Kooning's. In any case, you can think about this in a lot of different ways. And something I said to you a long time ago, for example, when all of the Americans, the abstract expressionists and everything, you've got to kill Picasso, right? You've got to go through Picasso. And so it's like this idea, I know it's Freudian, but you got to kill your father before you can be free. And so some people see this in that context. I'm not sure it was for Rauschenberg, but certainly it's a commentary about where sort of art was going. And then with works like this is Rauschenberg's Canyon from 1959, one of the great combines, and Jasper John's Target with Plaster Cast from 55. Now you see literally it's just the support. We've got sheet metal, we've got an eagle, we got a pillow, we got plaster casts, we got little doors you can open and close. here, all of this is now a very different kind of surface. The term combine is a term that Rauschenberg invents to describe works that he felt were a combination of painting and sculpture, and that they existed somewhere between art and life. They weren't art, they weren't life, but he said, I work in between. I work in the crack in between art and life. And so that's what a combine was supposed to be. They can hang on the wall, they can be freestanding, they can be on the floor. If they hang on the wall, you definitely sense this idea of sort of hanging things. Now, who's instrumental and who's inspirational for Rauschenberg and Johns? It's not so much the American abstract expressionists, it's one guy, and that's Marcel Duchamp. Duchamp is the guy that these two are totally sort of in love with. And this is a work by Rauschenberg on the left called Trophy Number 2, subtitled For Tini and Marcel Duchamp. Tini was Marcel Duchamp's wife. For Tini and Marcel Duchamp, 1960. Some of the things that are on, this is a combine, some of the things that are on that are oil, paint, charcoal, paper, printed reproductions, a necktie, sheet metal, a metal spring, a chain, a spoon, and a water-filled plastic drinking glass on wood. So that's the media. This is at the Walker today in Minneapolis, the Walker Art Center. And then Jasper Johns' field painting that we have on extended loan from the artist. This belongs to the collection of Jasper Johns, but he lets it reside here. Field painting, 1963-64. If you have, everybody needs to give everybody a label. I mean, if you have to give these guys a label, it's not pop art. I would say they are neo-Dada, that they are reflecting and inspired by many of the concepts that had already been explored by Duchamp about the nature of art, what determines what is art, who determines it, how is it determined, etc. So in the field painting, for example, this is a great, great painting. You'll notice Rauschenberg and Johns are different. Rauschenberg is very much into this material idea of working in this sort of crack between art and life. Johns is much more cerebral. Johns is so smart and so intellectual. Johns is, of course, in my estimation, America's greatest living artist. He's in his, 80s now. He's still alive, but he's America's greatest living painter. And this guy's so smart and so intellectual and so cerebral, like Marcel Duchamp. You have to, half the time it's all going over your head until you really sit and think about it. For example, in the field painting, it's this two-paneled work. There's a furrow here where it doesn't quite join. And there are these letters, and these letters are all on little hinges so they can move. There's a footprint. I can't even see. There's a footprint. That's Jasper Johns' footprint. There's a little switch, because the switch is important, because unfortunately in this photograph you don't see it. There's an R, that's a neon R that can be illuminated by the switch. You'll notice it's titled Field Painting. So first of all, field, we think of Greenberg. The flat surface is a field, right? Rothko, the field, right? Okay. We think of a field, though. There's a field out in nature, and if you plow a field, you might kick up things that are when you make a furrow with your plow, you kick up dirt, and that dirt might reveal little artifacts that get kicked up. Notice the difference between the two halves of this painting. This is all expressive, lots of brushstrokes. So clearly this is some reference, perhaps, to the abstract expressionists. This is very plain, much more conservative and understated, but this is the side where we have Johns' footprint. There's a letter that illuminates, and that's an R, and here's the switch, right? This painting is certainly autobiographical. There's a Ballantine can, and there's a Savarin can. These refer to Johns' own work when he casts these in bronze and paints them, painted beer cans, painted paint can, coffee can. These are the real cans, though. So it's autobiographical, but what's very interesting is the difference in the two halves, this expressive side, this more modest, discreet side, but that's the side with his footprint. This is probably also a reference to his relationship with Rauschenberg. This is Rauschenberg. This is Johns. Rauschenberg was known to be so wonderfully gregarious and outgoing and charming and social and witty. Everybody loved Rauschenberg. Johns was very quiet, very humble, didn't like crowds. I mean, he was very different personality, very low key. And the further evidence of this, or point that might relate to this, is the switch and the R, because Johns can turn on Rauschenberg. When he flips the switch, he's turning on Rauschenberg in a number of different ways, because of course they are having a relationship as well. This is the kind of stuff that goes on in Johns. Your head starts exploding because he's so smart about how he deals with things. Just these little drips where he's making a comment about a painting by an abstract expressionist. So this is a great painting from the 60s. Then we have a later Johns, this one, Perilous Night from 1982. So this is well into the 80s. And here you see hanging things. This is an incredibly complex painting. I don't have time to really go through it all. These are casts of Johns's arms. This is a reference to the handkerchief that's in a Picasso painting called Weeping Woman. When you actually look closely at this treatment of the grain, that goes actually all the way across here, and it's almost impossible to see unless you know what you're looking for. It's a reference to one of the figures in Matthias Grunewald's Isenheim altarpiece, one of the guards that's falling back during the resurrection. This panel is actually the grain from his front door of his house. The reference, Perilous Night, is to a song by John Cage. And of course, the three individuals who are so important for Johns and Rauschenberg are Marcel Duchamp, Merce Cunningham, and John Cage, because they're doing the same thing. For Cunningham, all motion is dance. For Cage, all sound, or lack of sound, is music. And Rauschenberg and Cage and Cunningham are all at Black Mountain College together. So those are the progenitors of Rauschenberg and Johns: Duchamp, Cunningham, and Cage, and they'll all collaborate as well. Johns did finally meet Duchamp, something he had wanted to do. They met in 1960, and right after that meeting, he purchased, there's a work by Marcel Duchamp called The Green Box. It's from 1934, and it contains Duchamp, all of his notes for the large glass. Remember that work I showed you? Johns bought one of those, and at the same time, Rauschenberg bought one of the replicas of the bottle rack, one of the ready-mades, and he asked Duchamp to sign it for him, and Duchamp wrote in French, "It is impossible to remember the original title." That was his signature. Perilous Night, though, is a profound work in many ways, but again, Johns likes codes. He likes encryption. He likes embedding things. He doesn't want to be obvious. He's not going to put his heart and soul out there. You're going to have to do some work, and when you do, it's really quite magnificent. Now he's a part. This is Johns. Here's Rauschenberg. Here's Andy Warhol. Wesselmann and Oldenburg. They're all here now. These guys will be taken on by Leo Castelli. So now he'll be the gallery dealer in New York who will promote the works of all these individuals. And this is a photograph that was taken in 1982. It was at a lunch to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Castelli's gallery. It was at a restaurant in New York City. So I think I said this is Oldenburg. This is Ellsworth Kelly. Dan Flavin is here. You can see Warhol, Rauschenberg. This is Leo Castelli, right in the center. James Rosenquist is off to the right down here. So now these are the artists that we associate with the pure pop art, not Rauschenberg and Johns, although certainly you have to talk about them, but they're in a little different place. So Warhol, Lichtenstein, Rosenquist, these are the people that we think of as more purely pop. So Warhol is at the top of the chart, really, because this is a work called, these are works we have, A Boy for Meg, 1962, which is an oil and egg emulsion painting on canvas, and Green, Maryland on the right from 62. It's acrylic and silk screen on linen. Of course, we all know Warhol in so many ways. He embodies the spirit of American popular culture, consumerism, many of the things we talked about with the British pop art. Warhol is difficult too in the sense that he's easy to dismiss if you don't take time to think about what he does and how he becomes an incredibly important commentator on America in the 50s and in the 60s and what he confronts us with. Because of course he speaks in a kind of cryptic Warholian gibberish, and because of course he doesn't really want to reveal a lot of things, and he tries to sort of avoid that. At one point, though, he does say this, quote, "What's great about this country is that America started the tradition where the richest consumers buy essentially the same things as the poorest. You can be watching TV and see Coca-Cola, and you know that the president drinks Coca-Cola." He said that, I'm not making this up. He doesn't say Diet Coke, he says Coca-Cola. And you know that the president drinks Coca-Cola. Liz Taylor drinks Coca-Cola. And just think, you can drink Coca-Cola too. A Coke is a Coke, and no amount of money can get you a better Coke than the one the bum on the corner is drinking. All the Cokes are the same, and all the Cokes are good. Liz Taylor knows it, the president knows it, the bum knows it, and you know it. So yeah, it's mass-produced. It's not like, oh, this is a great vintage Coke, and I can afford that one, but you have to drink some other kind of the dregs from a different vineyard, or something like that. So he's right. There's a leveling. You know, a Campbell's soup is Campbell's soup. I mean, in terms of consumption. The way he treats celebrity and the idea of the fleeting nature of celebrity and the cult of celebrity, the royal family, Marilyn Monroe, Liz Taylor, all of these are incredibly sophisticated in many ways commentaries on the times that we're talking about here in the 60s especially. This is a work on the left that relates to Robert Rauschenberg. The title of the work is Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. It's subtitled The Rauschenberg Family from 1962. It's a silkscreen on canvas. He made a number of portraits of Robert Rauschenberg. They were obviously good friends. He did this in the 60s. Warhol had started as a commercial artist. He had done designs for catalogs for, shoes and things like that, purses, shoes. Johns and Rauschenberg had done window displays for various department stores. So they had a kind of commercial background in many ways. It was really looking at Rauschenberg and Johns when Warhol began to think, maybe I don't have to just be a commercial artist. Maybe these guys seem to be getting some traction. Maybe I should think more seriously about it. So he decided to take a picture that he asked Rauschenberg for a family photo. And the one that Rauschenberg gave him was this one, when Rauschenberg, in fact, is just a little child in this picture. It was a picture that had been taken during the days of the Depression. Rauschenberg's family came from Texas, and they had gone through the Depression, and they had been a very essentially poor family. They were tenant farmers. The title relates to James Agee. It relates to the Bible, of course, as well. It relates to Walker Evans, that great book by Walker Evans and James Agee that showed pictures of all the tenant farmers, et cetera, throughout the South. But Warhol, in his typical fashion, then replicates this some 80 times. Many of them are sepia. A few, though, are silvery. So the sepia ones kind of refer to the old age of the photograph. The silver and black ones more to the idea of modern photography. Again, it's through its replication, through its relationship to Rauschenberg, it creates a number of different ways of thinking about the artist, about life, about America. This is nowhere better seen than in the images of Jackie Onassis, Jacqueline Kennedy, especially at the time of the assassination. This is where Warhol, I think, is at his best in some ways. This is such a traumatic event for the country, and the way he deals with it through a series of images. We don't have some of the great series. This is one we do have. This is a print. It's a silk screen print in silver on woven paper from 1966. It's called Jacqueline Kennedy #1. This is, of course, in Dallas when they first arrive. She's wearing that very famous dress and the pillbox hat. There's Jack Kennedy back there. They're in the motorcade, and it's bright sunlight, and she almost looks like she's winking at us. The light is so bright, it's almost like she's winking, and then you start thinking, gosh, it's like you're winking, like I have a secret, I know something, maybe I know my husband's going to get shot. There are all these things, but where it's most dramatic in Warhol is when he juxtaposes this image of the arrival in Dallas against her at the president's coffin, casket. And she's veiled, remember that? And what these juxtapositions are, when he does things like that, he shows you, what he's really showing you is how quickly life can change. 1 minute, you're happy, you're with your husband, it's sunlight, everybody's celebrating this guy. The next minute he's shot, and my life is forever changed. That kind of drama, Andy Warhol, when attempted to kill Warhol, and he was hit with several bullets, these kinds of things. So Warhol I always had problems with Warhol. I used to, I don't know, he doesn't do much for me. But then when you really start to think about the undercurrent of his thought, then you come around and see. His movies as well. If you want to read something about his films, I wrote the film notes. When we had the Warhol exhibition here, we did a film series, and I wrote the film notes. Those are online. You can go to the film programs, click on the archives, and you'll see all my film notes, and you'll see the notes that I wrote about Warhol as a filmmaker. Claes Oldenburg, again, he's a major figure. A number of works that we have. This one is up. These two are not. On the left is Standing Mitt with Ball, half scale, 6 feet. It's a first baseman's mitt from 1973. It's made out of lead, steel, and laminated wood. This is up, the little flag. This is called USA flag, 1960. It's made of muslin, plaster, tempera, and wire. This is off view, soft drain pipe. The red hot version from 1967. This is vinyl lined with canvas filled with polystyrene chips and then on a painted metal stand. Oldenburg is very important, first through the happenings. He's a major protagonist in the creation of happenings. I already talked about that. He comes up with one of the greatest quotes, comparable to what the tabular quote of Richard Hamilton was in England, but it's an American version. And what Oldenburg says about where he finds his inspiration and what he's in favor of. He says, quote, "I am for cool art," cool with a K, the cigarettes. "I am for cool art, 7-Up art, Pepsi art, Sunshine art, 39-cents art, 15-cents art, Vatronol art, Drop Bomb art, VAM art, Menthol art, L&M art, X-Lax art, Veneta art, Heaven Hill art, Pamrel art." These are all products, many of which don't exist anymore. Sanomed art, Rex art, $9.99 art, Now art, New art, How art, Fire art, Sale, Last Chance art, Only art, Diamond art, Tomorrow's art, Frank's art, Duck's art, Meterama art. So he's going to take everything from contemporary culture, consumerism, and one of his most famous events is when he creates in New York City on East 2nd Street, the famous store. So here he is, sitting in his store, and he's created everything in this store. This is in December of 1961, and he made everything here. It's both comestibles, so it's foodstuffs, pies and hot dogs and hamburgers and whatever, but also like sneakers. Here's a pair of sneakers and things like that. We have related to it this work in our collection. This is Glass Case with Pies, subtitled Assorted Pies in a Case, from 1962. And the materials here in our pies are burlap, soaked in plaster, painted with enamel, with real pie tins in glass and metal case. So here he is at the store, and he opens the store in 1961. It's a real store. I mean, it was a real location on East 2nd Street, and he sold all of these plaster and various materials, replicas of both clothing, shoes, foodstuffs, and people would come and buy it, and he would sell it. And if he ran out, this was also his studio, he'd go back and he'd make another one, and he'd put it back out just like he was going to go bake another loaf of bread. there are all these crudely painted surfaces. They're obviously a parody of abstract expressionism, replicas of all these foodstuffs. So he had things like pastries, shirts, hamburgers, sneakers, very famous women's panties, all kinds of stuff. And he talked about the store, and he said it was, quote, talking about what its purpose was, quote, "This store will be constantly supplied with new objects, which I will create out of plaster and other materials in the rear half of the place. The objects will be for sale in the store. The store will be open every day at hours I will post. The hours when I will be able to be in this store, which is also, of course, my studio." So this was a very famous, it was sort of another version of a happening in some ways. We have a later work, the Clarinet Bridge on the right, 1992. This is not the current installation. We apparently haven't photographed this in the current state, so this is an old photograph. This is not the room that you'll see. And then these are two studies for the Clarinet Bridge. Those are Clarinet Bridge two positions from 1992. These are charcoal on paper from the Menhill Drawing Institute in Houston. So we have the Clarinet Bridge, and most of these, almost all of these things are projects for large public sculptures, or literally like bridges and things. What would it be like to actually have a bridge that's like a clarinet going across a river? The famous one for the Thames was they have, you know, that ball that goes in your toilet that floats, the old toilets. That was going to be a monument in London. There are other things that he did complete, like the clothespin and stuff like that are all around the world. There's the spoon bridge in Minneapolis that has the cherry on top of the big spoon. All of these things. So this was going to be a similar thing, but it never got beyond this sort of model stage here. He plays with materials, as you know. So there's very often taking something that we know is in real life is hard, metallic, whatever, and then he does it in a soft, kind of droopy polyurethane kind of plastic so that it droops or it sags, so that when you start thinking about how would I use this, for example, the soft toilet, how would I actually sit on this toilet? It's not going to work because it's all just sagging to the ground. So he delights in disrupting the functionality of things, how it would function in real life, now being shown in a different way. We have the great eraser, of course, out in the sculpture garden. So the full, complete title of the work, that's on the far right, is Typewriter Eraser, Scale 10, Model 1998. That's the full title. And then it's fabricated in 1999. Now, of course, he worked for a long period of time with his wife, Koja van Bruggen. She passed away, I think it was in 2008 or so, I'm not quite sure. Or 2009 maybe. So these are collaborative things. He worked a lot with his wife. They had similar approaches to things. This is a drawing, colored pencil and watercolor from the Whitney, that shows the soft idea of the eraser that we have typewriter. But of course, today I always have to explain what this is like, because if you're talking to anybody under, 50, they don't know. And then this is one that's a smaller model that's at the LA County Museum, a typewriter eraser 1970 that's made from vinyl, canvas, cardboard, painted with spray enamel. This is about 21 inches tall, so it sits on a table. The typewriter eraser has a very fascinating history. Oldenburg's father was a Swedish consul general. He was posted to Chicago, and as a child, Oldenburg used to hang out at his office when his father was doing a lot of paperwork, and he would play with all the different machines his father had, the adding machine, the typewriter, and his father had this kind of eraser in the office. So he loved office supplies. He just thought, they're so banal. And so they become this rich inspiration in his art. They lead to everything, kinds of sculptures, drawings, public plans for public monuments, typewriter scissors, a typewriter eraser, all these things. He thinks when he puts something up like this, not laying down, he's almost always thinking about a human figure, that it relates to a concept of figuration in that sense. Like this is the spiked hair of the top of the figure. He's very often thinking about that. There's I lived in Cleveland for a number of years, and there's a beautiful one there that's called the Free Stamp. It's the stamp that you use to stamp things that, again, nobody uses anymore. And that was interesting because I was there when he came to think about doing that work and where it was going to be placed. And in Public Square in Cleveland is the headquarters of BP America. And originally it was meant to be in front of that building. And if you go to that building today, there's a planter that has plants in it. That was supposed to be the pad, the ink pad. And the free stamp was supposed to stand straight up like it was in its ink pad. But when the BP America corporate people saw that they were going to have a rubber stamp in front of their building, they started to think, well, wait a minute, that's like a symbol of bureaucracy and this and that. So they refused to allow it to be there. So then there was a huge controversy in Cleveland. I was teaching at Cleveland State at the time. The work went into storage. A bunch of us, it was a number of professors, critics, people, we all got together and circulated a petition. And what the petition essentially said, look, if you're not going to install this in Cleveland, then give it to somebody else, give it to another city. Don't just have it sit in a warehouse for the rest of its life. So that started this whole movement. He came back to Cleveland with Koja van Bruggen, and we took him around in a car throughout the city to see if we could find another location. And the location he chose was near where the Cleveland Stadium is, where the Browns play, but it's also near a bunch of the civic buildings of City Hall. And so he changed things. Originally, the stamp would be in the ink pad. You wouldn't see the bottom of the stamp. And then he said, well, I think we should put it in this park, but now we're not going to have a stamp pad. It's going to look like it was thrown out of the window by some bureaucrat, which means you're going to see the bottom of it. So then it was, well, then what are we going to put on the bottom? So he and Koja van Bruggen talked about it, and then they decided, we'll put the word free. Just the opposite of bureaucracy, right? So, and then he said, we're going to have to cut, because this had been fabricated. And then he said, but we're going to have to go back to fabrication and cut part of the handle so that it sits now into the ground. So they made those changes, they installed it. It's one of the most popular things in Cleveland now. And nobody knows when you go to the BP building, why do they have that planter there? Because that was supposed to be initially what he thought it was going to be upright, this idea like a human figure, but then he changed it entirely. Lots of stories like that with public monuments, not just Oldenburg, but a lot of other people where, this thing would probably still be in a warehouse somewhere. Lichtenstein, of course, one of our favorites, and one of the greatest paintings by Lichtenstein, because it's so pivotal in his career, is the Look Mickey painting on the right from 1961. And this is the source of that. This is a page from the Golden Book for children called Donald Duck, Lost and Found from 1960. This is the book he was reading and looked at. It was illustrated by Bob Grant and Bob Totten. He was actually reading to his children, and he had a bunch of these golden books. You know that book, right? The little, yeah. We're all of a certain age. The rest of you, I'm sorry, you'll have to Google it. And this was the page he saw. And he started to think, I wonder what that would look like, kind of, if I blew it up and whatnot. So that was the inspiration. He changes some of the positions and things for what you see here. So many pop artists were interested in comic books, comic strips, illustration. Some of them came from commercial art backgrounds. So this is not something they thought was inferior or somehow not worthy of art. And Lichtenstein is forever associated with this kind of comic strip subject matter. The story is that, in fact, we know Warhol began to do this kind of imagery at the same time, but he wasn't aware that Lichtenstein was doing it. And then Lichtenstein had a one-person show at Castelli Gallery that Warhol walked into, and Warhol walked into it and he saw all of these incredible paintings, and he said, okay, this is the guy for the comic books, I'm not even going to compete. And he went in a whole different direction. He said, there's no way I can compete with this guy. So he went in a different direction. He even recreates the Ben Day dots, the little dots of the printing on Mickey's face here. They're speech balloons. The reason this work is so important is because it is the first time that he begins to draw from commercial comic or illustration. And so everything that he's going to now expand upon is really spinning off of this painting. So this is a pivotal painting in the development of his career. Here's the little Ben-Day dots here. This is a much later work. This is the work that's at, was that Minneapolis? Yeah, the Minneapolis Institute of Art today. It's called Vicky, I Thought I Heard Your Voice, from 1964. This is how sophisticated they get. What he was using here, when he first thought about trying to recreate the Ben-Day dots, he had a dog's grooming brush, and it had kind of spiky, comb part bristles, thank you. But at the tip of the bristle was they were all little balls, so you wouldn't snag. So he would put the dog brush in the paint, and then he would sort of push it against the thing. But it's very subtle here. And of course, what I like about it is that Mickey looks like he's blushing. Here, it's kind of cute. Eventually, he develops a whole sophisticated way of laying down a screen. So in case you don't know about Ben-Day dots, we should give this guy credit. They actually were invented by a guy named Benjamin Day. So they're called Ben-Day dots. He died in 1916. He was a New York printer, and he first used these small dots in photo engraving. The idea was to try to enhance the range of a halftone, to bring in a little more sort of depth. This painting is so important to Lichtenstein. We're so fortunate to have it. It even appears in other paintings. If you saw our Lichtenstein show a few years ago, we had this painting right as you came into the entrance to the show. And you could see into the show, you could see the Mickey painting, and you could see this. So it was a nice. So this is Artist Studio. Look, Mickey, 1973. This is at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. So there's our painting. Lichtenstein is really, believe it or not, I mean, despite the cartoon imagery in the comic book, he's very much a formalist. This guy, believe me, he is precise about color registration and color context and what's next to what and what shape and what color. But of course, he speaks also to as all these guys did in some ways, to the abstract expressionists. So this is a painting by Willem de Kooning, Merritt Parkway from 1959. And of course, a very famous series of paintings that by Lichtenstein are the brushstroke paintings. So this is called Brushstrokes from 65. This relates in part to the effort that many of these artists, again, needed to get out from under the shadow of the abstract expressionists. So at one point, Lichtenstein says, quote, "It was hard to get a painting that was despicable enough so that no one would hang it. Everybody was hanging everything. It was almost acceptable to hang a dripping paint rag. Everybody was accustomed to this. The one thing everyone hated was commercial art. Apparently, they didn't hate that enough either, because then when he started going to commercial, all of a sudden that was selling. But he's saying you could do anything, just slapdash. You could take Jackson Pollock's paint rag and tack it on the wall, and people would say, "Oh my God, it's a masterpiece." So this is a series in which he is commenting, because everything that is loose and free and spontaneous and gestural and existential in the de Kooning is now controlled, mechanical, replicated, very sophisticated, very tight, very, very much controlled. Here's the brush. So the relationship is to this, but of course the source for some of the brushstroke paintings are comics very often. And here's the source for this painting. This is the comic that he saw, and this is was a series. It was in fact called the Charlton Comics series. This story was Strange Suspense Stories, the painting, number 72. It appeared in 1964 as a comic strip. These are the kind, you notice what the change from the Mickey one is this, that initially he goes to Disney, right? He's showing us a Disney character, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck. Very soon after that, he realized, that's too famous, and that has too much baggage and too much lineage and all that. I'm gonna look for comics that are less well-known, more pulp fiction kind of stuff, the kinds of things that not everybody's aware of. That takes us to the war images, Wham and all of that kind of stuff, which are among his greatest paintings. We don't have an example of that. But here, this is the kind of source that he would often look at. He takes on history. You know, he's a smart guy. He knows art history. So he has his interpretations of Cubism, Expressionism. The best, and it's funny, but it's also very interesting, is the series he does on Monet, on Rouen Cathedral, because he thinks, well, you know, the Impressionists had all these little dots, you know. And it's interesting, the artist he never does is Seurat. You would think that would be logical, that'd be a natural. You know, do Seurat. You know, that guy did paint in dots. But the Monet Rouen Cathedral series, which we had at the gallery during that show, it's really fascinating what he's doing. This is a Cubist. This is called Cubist Still Life 1974. By the way, these, I didn't mention, this is all Magna, that paint that we talked about with Morris Louis. Sometimes it's Magna with a little bit of oil. And then this is a kind of interesting one. This is called Entablature from 1974. So, you know, an entablature is in a Greek or Roman or classical temple. It's the horizontal part that's above the columns. And here he mixes a lot of stuff because he wants it to look almost sort of like stone. So it has oil, it has magna, it has sand, it has aluminum powder. So if you look carefully, it has almost a stony kind of surface to it. Harry hangs this in, this was kind of tongue in cheek, but I like it. Do you know where this painting hangs? It hangs above the Canova. So I think Harry here was going for the idea that this is the closest thing we have. It's a neoclassical sculpture and a classical kind of reference. But of course, Lichtenstein was not looking at architecture in Greece or in Rome. He was looking at the buildings in the New York financial district. So he was looking at the neoclassical buildings in New York for these entablatures. Again, this is well beyond pop art. 1983, this is our great painting with the Statue of Liberty. And here, you have to think about things. He's bringing together two different things here. Now what he's doing is he's kind of acknowledging the abstract expressionists, because part of the painting is very loose brushwork against his other sort of hard, metallic, commercially reproduced brushstrokes. It's the Statue of Liberty. It's in New York. He's essentially, in some ways, saying, you know, the two great icons of New York City, abstract expressionism and the Statue of Liberty. In a certain way, it's a kind of a tribute. Just a couple of other people, Wayne Thiebaud here, Cakes from 1963, and James Rosenquist, White Bread from 1964. A lot of food. So a lot of things, again, food is disposable. It's, you know, you eat it, it's gone, that kind of stuff. Thiebaud was born in Mesa, Arizona, but only by the time he was born, the family was already moving to Long Beach. He grew up in Long Beach, California. Again, he starts as a commercial artist. So does Rosenquist. He worked for Disney briefly as an apprentice, as a young animator. Comes to New York, he takes a master's degree in art history, actually. Then starts to study painting. He works in an advertising agency. By that time, he starts to frequent the Cedar Tavern, you know, where all the guys are hanging out. He becomes very friendly with Franz Klein and with de Kooning. But the thing that turned him off about all that was he said about abstract expression, quote, that it started to have, quote, a churchy feeling of a lot of New York paint. In other words, it was so reverential now, and like being in a church, that it was hard to kind of get out from under that. So these paintings are marvelous. They're almost like magic realism, because they have such a clarity and brightness and brilliance, beautiful handling of paint. Each work almost has a little aura, the color. They look like they're competing with each other, just the way you would want in a pastry case. You know, buy me, this kind of thing, you know. They're really brilliant. This is a very unusual Rosenquist. He was born in North Dakota, Grand Forks, but he moved to Minnesota and went to the University of Minnesota. He's in New York City by 1955. Like Thiebaud, he works in commercial art, but what Rosenquist does is work as a painter of billboards. So he works on a very large scale, which is very important to his later development. This is very unusual Rosenquist. It's kind of small. It's kind of modest. This was the first Rosenquist we brought into the National Gallery. We acquired this in 2008. We had not had a work prior to this by Rosenquist, which was unusual. So this is this kind of way he creates sections. Here it's logical because he's laying bread on top of each other, slices of bread. But normally he works in a kind of collage way where it looks like he's got 7 sections. But I'm going to end with a painting we don't have. I wish we did. Arguably one of the greatest paintings in America of the 20th century. It's by James Rosenquist. It's not one you see out all the time because it's 86 feet of painting and it's 10 feet high. And it's this one. This is when it was brought out for a while at MoMA. This is the great F-111 from 1964-65. This is oil on canvas with aluminum. It's, depending on how they arrange it, it is, sometimes it's 23 sections, or they can arrange them together along a long wall. This comes out of his billboard commercial experience. He said at one point, quote, "Painting is probably much more exciting than advertising, so why shouldn't it be done with that power and gusto, with that impact?" So this is the work that was shown at the Leo Castelli Gallery in 64-65. It took up, Castelli gave the whole gallery to the painting. It couldn't be shown long. It had to be shown broken up along different sections of the gallery. And it's one of the greatest American paintings of the 20th century. It deals, in essence, with the Vietnam War and with his attitudes about the war. It has the most incredible array of images, the plane, this is the very famous image of the little girl under the hairdryer. She looks like she's in a missile, but he said she's actually the one who's flying the plane. She's the aviatrix, he called her. It has one of the greatest depictions of what I call radioactive spaghetti here. When you see this painting, it just bowls you over, and it's one of the most iconic paintings. It comes out of a pop sort of orientation. Rosenquist did not like that term. He did not like to be called a pop artist. He sort of accepted it, and he just died, I think in 2017. He just passed away. So this is a magnificent painting. This is one you should check on and look at all the details. Okay, I think that takes us through pop art. Thanks very much.